Terrance and his company, they do the bulk of all this condoizing paperwork in Seattle. All the CC&R, all the separation, condoizing, all that's done, how it's done. This guy and his company does the bulk of the business in the Puget Sound. We got the man and the legend here this morning, folks. Let's give it up to Mr. Terrance Joseph, baby. Let's go, Mr. Joseph. The stage is yours, my man.
All right, well, welcome everybody to the Wild Wild West. I went to Montana a year ago. I grew up in Skyway, Renton area, very urban guy.
My neighborhood.
Got invited by some family friends to go to Montana, and I said, I don't want to go to Montana, there's nothing in Montana for me. But I grudgingly went, and I came back a changed man in a variety of ways. One, I think it is good to get away from all the chaos every once in a while. Put your phone away, put your laptop away. You don't have to come back with a belt buckle. You don't have to grow a beard. It's funny, I was doing this work for so many years, and I had a YouTube video out there, and last week I had a new client call, and we were on a Zoom call, and they said, I was watching one of your other attorneys on a YouTube video from a couple years ago, and I thought it was really helpful, and I appreciate all you're sharing. I'm like, it's the same guy. That was me. Years ago. Minus the belt buckle, minus the beard. Like I've changed an aesthetic, and part of the reason why I've done this is because, as you're hearing and as you already know, being in this industry, it is a time of new paradigm shifting. It's a pioneering time. I think for me, just having the beard and the Western wear and kind of changing my whole aesthetic and that, and even the way our firm identifies itself in terms of its branding and stuff, is to say we're heading into uncharted territory. We're heading into a place that requires new ways of thinking. This is going to require toolkits from the past, but you're going to have to learn which one of those tools are no longer helpful here, because this is a new paradigm. I was at the Maidenbauer Center earlier this week, where there was several hundred planners from all the cities in Washington that are all grappling with how are we down in Vancouver, in Spokane, in Bellingham, in all these podunk little places even, that are saying how are we going to implement what the state told us we have to do by the middle of next summer. This is not just Seattle. Seattle is great because they've already been doing it, but this is statewide. This is happening everywhere, and all the municipal planners are trying to figure out how to get there. And so I'm super excited to be here today to share with you a little background on me. I started almost 30 years ago in the industry. In terms of the legend, I've been hearing about this guy since the 90s as well, so I beg to differ about who the legends are around here.
But that's the true legend right here.
But there's been a lot of changes that have happened in the last 30 years. When I started, I took up a job in real estate working for the family land surveying business. My father-in-law, my wife's dad, was a land surveyor. He's retired now, and he had been working in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s doing land surveying, working with engineers and architects and surveyors, getting permits, mostly for things like subdivisions and unit lot subdivisions and boundary line adjustments and different types of building permits and planned unit communities, all these different things. And at the time in the 70s and 80s and 90s, it was a time when surveyors, engineers, and architects as professionals could submit maps and submit plans to various cities and jurisdictions and get pretty quick turnaround time in the form of permits and reviews, and they could spend most of their time doing their trade, their architectural work, their survey work, their engineering work. That was changing in the 1990s. Growth Management Act, environmental issues, multiple trades, all weighing in, more infill, things getting more difficult and challenging with a lot more moving parts, and you started developing a need to have more project management, more planning, more jurisdictional going back and forth. It was taking longer to get permits. That's how I got my job. It's ironic to me now because that was in the 90s when things were getting more bureaucratic and harder to manage permits. 30 years later, we're in this wild, wild west time where what we're going to talk about today in terms of these DADUs and ADUs and condominiumizations and all these things that are happening across the state of Washington now, it's a bit of a free-for-all because all of the work that's being done outside of your building permit are being done privately by the attorney, by the surveyor. It's a time where folks who understand how to use the toolkits and design these things can kind of work quasi like a planner in a jurisdiction. You're looking at a site, figuring out how it's going to lay out. You're not going back to the cities that you got your building permits from to get any kind of approval for the way that you're separating these units out. Talking about getting separate tax parcel numbers. You're getting fee simple separate land and buildings to be able to sell and buy, just like it was going through a normal subdivision process without going through the subdivision process. So I just found out this last week too that Seattle has announced that as they unroll their new plan, because even though they've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years, they have to comply with the new state mandates, and that means some changes and tweaks have to be made and some new implementations on new products like duplex, triplex, quadplex, all in the single family zone. And so by doing all these types of products along with the AADUs and the DADUs, they also just announced they're not going to allow you to separate the accessory dwelling units through any type of subdivision process at the city. So you're still going to need to use the condominiumization process if you want to separate those out. But they're also saying some neat things about rolling out new square footages. We talked about these DADUs selling like hotcakes at 1,000 square feet. They're going to 1,500 square feet now. 1,500, baby. Game changers, people have already been just grabbing onto these 1,000 square foot products, and if you have a basement, that's not counted, your garage is not counted, so there's some architectural neat kind of features that you can use to kind of make the place feel bigger, and it sounds like you're going to be talking about some cool new designs. There's some really neat architectural ways you can make these homes feel with open doors out to patios and different things to make it feel more roomy. Now going to 1,500 square feet, you're effectively going to almost always get 3 bedrooms now rather than just 2. And that's going to be a huge difference. The statistics are showing too that 30 years ago when I started in this industry, you know, there was almost 4 people per household in the region that was on average. Now it's just over 2. So people are living smaller, households are smaller, less kids, and so you've got the 1,000 to 1,500 square foot model actually fits the way people live today better. And you're talking about brand new construction, and also you're talking about typically in very nice options for neighborhoods, because as Thatch was saying, it used to be that this was multifamily stuff that people were doing, and you were restricted to these multifamily zoned areas, which are typically along corridors like Rainier or MLK and places like that. Now you're talking about just globally all the single family zoned lots, all throughout Seattle, but also now, as I mentioned, all throughout the state in all these different cities. They're all being converted from single family to multifamily. This is a waving of a magic wand and saying, oh, we have a housing crisis, we need to figure out some more places to put homes, hopefully middle homes, housing homes to be a little bit more affordable, and we're going to make it mandatory across the whole state. That changes the whole configuration of what's been 150 years in the making in terms of how we've developed our land and our zoning over the years. We've had single family, multifamily, we've kept them separate. We're really now saying that there is no more single family. Everything is multifamily. We want multiple dwelling units in our single family zones. And as it turns out, that's where the inventory is. Right? In the single family zones, that's where you have a backyard, that's where you have a side yard that has room to put a product. A lot of the multifamily zone stuff also got really used up and eaten up. And so unless you're tearing down something, there's no real room on a lot of those properties to build up. Plus with environmental and topographical constraints to our region, it's hard to find good land. But there's a ton of land in the single family zone that's just sitting there ripe and ready to be developed if you know how to do it. And so part of this Wild Wild West, this prospecting, this pioneering theme that I've been carrying through, I think it really fits, and it continues to fit as we evolve with the new jurisdictional implementations that are coming in, because you're just seeing all of this new opportunity if you know what the rules are, and the rules are changing constantly, right? When I first got here talking with John and your team, like the lending, you know, that's changing. The insurance world is completely changing. There's all of these things changing, and we're trying to get an understanding about how we're going to be able to take the whole real estate sector and get it to be more customized to what's actually now happening. Because again, this is something new that has pieces from the past, but we're going into uncharted territory. In order to do that, one of the first things we're going to have to do as we get going into the presentation is just open your mind to be paradigm shifting. I know almost everybody here is already in that frame of mind, that's why you're here, is that you are a kind of person. But I find it's interesting in these meetings when I give these talks, we talk about how to unlock the potential of hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity in these properties. And people will walk away from it and go, well, I had a bad experience with a condo once, an HOA, like they didn't file a tax return on time, or I didn't know what to do when I was going to sell it because I had to give a new buyer all the documents. And I'm like, that's the takeaway that you're getting from all of this is a tax return that takes 5 minutes to fill out a form, and that's what you walk away with, well, I don't know if I like this. My point in that is to say, open your mind to being able to shift paradigms a little bit. We're going to talk about some different terminologies. Part of this, you know, we're making up words. Condoization, condominiumization, ADU, GADU, all these things. It's a little bit of just getting the lay of the land of the words, of the terminology, right? I got a lot of young people working in the firm now that are helping me understand how important it is to put messaging out there with social media, all these things. So they coined the term for me, "Who's your daddy?" So now that's like a website. If you go to Who's Your Daddy, it goes to our law firm and TikTok and Instagram. Yes, I'm the daddy. That's right. All right, we'll flip to this first slide here. And I want to talk for a second about something meaningful that happened in 2018. It gets overlooked a lot, but I think it's informative as we move forward with a lot of these conversations. And that is that the state of Washington, up until 2018, had a different section in its code to deal with condominiums. And when most people think about condominiums, they think about high-rise, they think about apartments, they think about walls-in ownership, which is one type of condominium, where you have your typical 10-story, 12, 20-story building, and everybody owns units that are on different floors. The HOA is pretty heavily involved because there's hallways and elevators and rooftop decks and out parking areas and landscaping and irrigation and you name it. And the HOA is doing all this stuff. Those types of condos are what people think of when they think of the word condominium. But in 2018, the code changed, and condominiums that were previously in a different section of the code got put into this new code that was created that we call WCIWA. It just stands, it's an acronym, and it stands for the Washington Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act. And the significance of this is that they put the condos under this section of the code, and they took subdivisions, which is short plats and unit subdivisions and traditional, what people say, fee simple. They're talking about going through municipal review of some kind and getting subdivisions to where you're getting your parcel numbers and your lots through a subdivision that's being reviewed by the jurisdiction. They took all of those from the old chapter that it was in, and they put that also under the same code section, under WCIWA, which is chapter 6490 of our RCWs. Why that's significant is because by putting condos and subdivisions in the same code section, they started to identify the way that they talk about the different parts of these communities that are being created with the same nomenclature, the same terms. We're now calling all lots, tracts, parcels, or whatever it is that you're creating units in the code. Doesn't matter if it's a condo, doesn't matter if it's a subdivision through the city, it's a unit now. Well, that's kind of a term that we used to use only when we're talking about condos, but now we're talking about that when we're talking about subdivisions. So even if you go to the city of Seattle and subdivide your property, they call it parcel A, it's going to be a unit according to the code. And then shared spaces like driveways and pedestrian access and bike storage and you name it. Those areas that are shared under the code are called common elements. Well, that's a term that came out of the condo world from the previous code chapter, where things that were shared by everybody were called common elements. Things that were shared by not everybody, but were still things separate from your unit, were called limited common elements. That's the same terminology now under the code that applies to subdivisions. So I bring all that up to say because as we move forward, what you're going to start hearing are these themes of condos that we're talking about today are much more like subdivisions in people's historical paradigm. The way you think about financing, the way you think about what part of the property is encumbered by my loan? What do I have to do if I get a loan for the whole piece, then I condo it, now I want to sell one, I have to release the interest of that loan. These are all subdivision type of thinking that really is going to apply to everything we're talking about here with condominiums. So one of the first things you can do with the paradigm shift is start to realize we're talking about condominiums that are more like subdivisions, and in that regard, getting over some of the hurdles because there's a really bad stigma in a lot of development community people's minds about the word condo or about the word HOA. It just conjures up people's thoughts of things that were going on in the 2000s with a lot of the construction defect laws and ambulance chasing that was going on after some of the big developers that had done a lot of big condos. And people are like, oh, I never do condos. Well, if you're never going to do condos, you're not going to be part of this new wave of real estate development because this is how it's happening. Not just in Seattle and Kirkland, who've been doing it for the last 5 years, but this is what all of these cities across Washington are now looking at is we're going to give you building plans and you're going to go hire an attorney and a surveyor and they're going to be the ones to help you separate the ownership. You're not coming back here to subdivide these. You're going to get your division through the condominiums. So it's important to understand that these types of condominiums are more like subdivisions. We call them airspace condominiums to distinguish it from the vertical type of condos where you own the walls in. When you own the walls in of your building and you're going vertically up and second floor, third floor, fourth floor has different owners. Those are walls in ownership and it's limited to the space inside and then the outside parts are what the HOA maintains. It doesn't own it, but it maintains it and they're owned jointly by all the owners. What we're talking about here today with the DADUs and the ADUs and the duplex, triplex, quadplex is airspace where we're going to draw a boundary on the ground. we're going to draw like a subdivision boundary on the land, on a survey map that takes the parent parcel and carves up where the condo units are going to be. And then that's the condo unit. It could be vacant land that you're going to build on later. It could be a duplex. It could be a single family home. It could be a DADU, an ADU. It's irrelevant what is on the ground. I always give the analogy when you drive down Lake Washington through my own town of Renton and Skyway area, you go down around, you'll see all these boat marinas that are down there with boat slips that are in there. If you pull up the title records on a lot of those properties, you're going to see those are condos. Right. They're condominiums where people own a boat slip as their unit. It's drawn on a map. This is where you park your boat, and that's the unit that you own. And then you have a dock that might be shared with the person that has a unit on the other side of the dock, and that might be your limited common element where you're sharing a dock between the two people that have boat slips on either side of it. And then there's the common docks where all the other docks are feeding into, where everybody uses it, and that's the common element. And then it goes to where there's a locker room and a bathroom and a place to store your stuff and maybe a TV room, and that's the common element. So these are condominiums structured for a boat marina, and I give that to help people understand one of the first things you've got to do here is get it out of your mind that condo has anything to do with what's on the ground. You can literally condominiumize anything. You can condominiumize vacant land. I'll talk about that in a little bit here, that from the maneuvers we're talking about, if your goal is to get into something, rehab it, and sell it, you may want to condo it before you've even built in the back and get rid of the loan. Now, if your goal is to keep, then there's still benefits in doing the condo sooner because you might be able to use certain financial arrangements to help with what you're doing in the back. But the point is that you're going to be able to divide these things through the condominium, whether you've built on it or not. And there's risks when you do it too soon, because there might be things with your building permit process that require you to make adjustments or changes, and you want to make sure that you have a pretty good idea that your site plans are going to work before you start creating condos, before you build things. But the point is to say, you can do it at any time. You don't have to wait till something's built. A lot of people have in their mind from the old paradigm, I can't do a condo until something's built. And then I have to have the surveyor come out and as-built it and show where everything is at. That's the old walls-in paradigm, right? That's the skyrise condo where in order to know where your unit is, if it's on the 3rd floor, I got to measure your walls in, which means the surveyor has to go out after it's built and measure to the walls. Where's the bathrooms? Where's the living room? Where's the bedrooms? And get those dimensions, and that's my unit and my square footage. That's not what we're talking about here today. We're talking about airspace condos, more like a subdivision. I don't need anything to be built to know where to draw a line on the ground. That is my condo unit, is those lines on the ground.
Can I say something?
Yes.
That's the reason why back then, when they talk about the boat slip, you can buy those boat slips for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. So when you buy the condominium, you can buy a boat slip. Right. And that's where they buy it. And all they own is a slip there, but then they can always sell it. And that will be a condo. When you ever write out paperwork, you got to write it on the condo paperwork. So that's one thing. That's what we're talking about. The other thing, I like the idea of that the city says, go talk to an attorney and go get it, condoized, right? The faster we get it out of the city's hand, the faster we get the damn permit in our hand. It's the people at the city that slow shit down.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That's why single family with ADU, you can get permits literally in like 5 to 6 months. Everything. Even the paperwork that Terrance does. You go in and try to get a 4-unit townhouse site, it will take you a year. It's just the BS behind the scene. That's to show you who's slowing up things. It's people at the city versus get them out. So when they give it out to people like him, we can get our permit literally quick. That's why it's even better now. See what I mean? So I love it.
I know Kirkland was lying when they said this, but they were at one of the presentations I gave, and one of the planners was there, and they were asked how long it would take you guys to issue a permit on one of your pre-approved plans, because a lot of these jurisdictions now are getting pre-approved libraries. And the guy said 2 weeks.
Oh.
What?
I know it's garbage. That was somebody from the city touting, he wanted to sound good in front of everybody. But the point is, you have pre-approved plans now that are developing a library. That means that the structure itself, if you like the design, and you don't need to make any major structural changes, those plans are pre-approved, then the only thing the city is really looking at is the placement on the site in terms of a site plan. That's a topography and utilities work. They're not really looking at the building again to see how it's assembled and so forth. and maybe it's not 2 weeks, but maybe it's a month or 2 or 3, depending on the jurisdiction, but the point is it's a heck of a lot faster than going through the typical process of starting from scratch with something. So, one other thing I want to mention before we change slides on this, that 2018 Wakaiwa Chapter 6490 thing with all the blurring of the lines between the condominium and the subdivision, that code also was informative in saying to the jurisdictions and the water and sewer agencies and all the different agencies that are involved in the building permit process. You, as a jurisdiction or an agency, a municipal agency or a utility agency, cannot treat the condominiumization, that being the separate ownership of these different parts of properties, any different than you would if it was not condominiumized. Now, that's an important distinction because what it says is if you go in to get building permits and you get water and sewer availability certificates and things like that, they cannot say, here you go, we'll give you all those permits, but if you're going to separate the ownership by dividing it however, subdivision or condominiumization or whatever you're going to do, now all these extra new conditions come on. Anybody who's been in the subdivision world knows that usually when you go into a municipal place to get a subdivision, there's a whole bunch of new conditions that come onto the project. Even things that weren't on the building side are now on the subdivision side. If you're outside of Seattle doing things in Kent or Renton or Bellevue, you try to do a subdivision, the subdivision itself is going to take several years because that's going to be where you have to bring in infrastructure and utilities and storm drainage and all this stuff. They're saying that under the code in 2018, and it's been carried forward now with the new House bills from last year, you cannot treat a project differently just because it's being owned by different people. That's a big deal. So again, it goes back to what Thatch was saying. You go get your permit, you're done with the municipal part. The building permit is usually the easier part. The land use oftentimes is where you get things hung up. You don't have a land use component now. You just get your building permit. Now it's important to start to know, we're talking about the city of Seattle going to 1,500 square feet. They've also upped their lot coverage for whatever it is you're going to build from 35%, which was kind of constraining. They get 3 units on some of these sites to fit right. It's up to 50% in their new proposal.
50.
Half the site can now be covered, which means you've got a bigger footprint. And you got 1,500 square feet, so you can go vertical. You got more footprint, you got more height, you got more bedrooms, you got more options. This is all coming. It's not even out yet. This is the proposal to come out in the spring. So we've already got a great situation right now with Seattle and Kirkland having been doing this game for the last 4 or 5 years, but it's getting better. And all the other cities are coming on board now in their own unique way. They have thresholds they were given by the state, say you have to do at least 1,000 square feet for your accessory dwelling. If you want to do 1,500, go ahead. But you can't go lower than 1,000. A lot of cities were at 650 or 750. They had owner occupancy requirements in one of those. There's no more owner occupancy requirements under the new code. So just a lot of cool Wild Wild West things are coming, and important to kind of note where this really started in earnest, I think, was 2018, and then a year later, Kirkland and Seattle started doing their own version of the ability to build 3 dwelling units on 1 single-family lot. The first sort of wholesale, there is no more single-family. Now we have multifamily in all of our desirable single-family neighborhoods, opening up lots of opportunities for new development to occur. So we'll go to the next slide. So what are the condo elements? And we'll go one more slide here. We talked about units. That was what I was saying. That's what you own. That's your own tax parcel number. That's your subdivision, right? Without subdividing. You're getting a description of a particular portion of a property, whether that's a boat slip, whether that's a vacant piece of land in the backyard, whether that is an actual structure that's already there or is going to be there. Doesn't matter what it is. The unit is what you own. And then the next slide. You have the common elements. These are the parts of the project that are shared by all. So if you have a common driveway, a common walkway, a place that's common to store your garbage, these are your common elements, and they're going to be drawn so that everybody has a right to share that. It's outside the unit. Next one is limited common elements. And limited common elements is just a subcategory of common elements. It's saying that instead of everybody sharing this, it's less than the whole. Now that might be something like a parking stall that can be assigned. A lot of our clients will say, you know what, the building permits for a lot of these jurisdictions only require 1 parking. So City of Seattle, you only need 1 parking for the primary. The DADU and the AADU, the accessory dwelling units, don't require parking. But a lot of clients are saying, I'd like to provide parking because that's going to help me market the property. And if you're on an alley or you're on a corner lot or you have room on the side of the house to get a driveway down, it might make sense to put something into the project that's not required for the building permit so that you have a more marketable product at the end. And so if you have something like that, you also might say, I'm going to put 3 parking stalls on this thing, and I'm going to wait and see what buyer wants to pay the extra 50 grand or 75 grand for a stall. If they don't want it, I'll sign it to another unit and raise that price. But the point is it creates some flexibility for you as the developer to be able to decide. That would be an example of a limited common element, something that not everybody gets to use, but it's something that is separate from the unit that I can then assign to the next unit. And just to show you, just graphically, and this, I like this picture for a couple of reasons, but one is, you can see here the way this is laid out. We have a dadu here, and then we have a single family residential, SFR, and an AADU. I just want to pause on that picture for a second and explain to you something that's been going on for the last 4 or 5 years that's about to get even more crazy. That is that there is an existing home on a piece of property. And the city's code says you can do 3 dwelling units on properties. 1 is a single family, 1 has to be an attached accessory dwelling unit, and then 1 can be detached. A couple of great things about the city of Seattle with regard to that paradigm. One is the detached does not have to be in the backyard. Does not have to be in the side yard. It can be in the front. So what a lot of savvy is going to be the attached accessory dwelling unit. Now why is that important? One reason it's important is because something called FAR, floor area ratio. The city looks at the overall development site and says, how much square footage can we put in the single family? That's based on a percentage of the lot size. And that right now is 50%. So if you have a 5,000 square foot lot, that means your primary can be 2,500 square feet. Does that make sense? Half of the size of the lot. Then the accessory dwelling units don't have FAR. They have the 1,000 square feet, and maybe 1,500 now coming up in the spring. So they have their own calculation that's just given to them as accessory dwelling units. But the single family, that gets its benefit from the overall site. Well, if this existing home that's been here for 100 years is only 1,000 square feet, or now under the new code, 1,500 square feet, if I can reclassify it as a dadu, then when I go to build in the backyard, I have the ability to do all of my FAR in the new single-family construction that I'm about to build. And since this was only 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, maybe I want to build a 2,500 square foot home and another accessory dwelling unit with that. So this reclassification of an existing home, you should be buying up properties right now that have 1,500 square foot homes. I'm just saying, because in March when that hits and people find out, oh, I can convert my 1,500 square foot into the dadu, and then that allows me then to open up my FAR for a single family and another accessory dwelling unit in the backyard or side yard. People are going to start eating up all the 1,500 square foot homes because of that new threshold, right? And that's coming in the next few months. So, and you can go on the City of Seattle's website and you can see their proposed language right on there. So, but again, getting ahead of what, as Thatch was saying before, everybody's doing this. This is an amazing time for configuring things. In this case, what some of our developer clients have been finding is that in the market, when the interest rates go one way or the other, the bigger home may not be advantageous. So maybe getting the 2,500 square foot home and trying to sell it at $2 million as opposed to the smaller 1,200, 1,500 square foot home that sells for 1.2. Maybe it's better to build something that is going to appeal to a more moderate income. And so they took something like this and said, I'm going to convert the single family home into a dadu, and I'm literally going to just build a duplex in the back that has 2 mirror images, no difference in size. But one is going to be called the single family, and one is going to be called the attached accessory dwelling unit. They're going to look exactly the same, and you wouldn't know by looking at the structures which one is the single family and which one is the attached accessory dwelling unit, because you'd have to look at the plans and see these little symbols on there to know that that's how it was architecturally designed. Is at the outside, they just looks like a duplex that's cut in half. But you can see that if the city says you can do 3, but one has to be attached, then this is how you can reclassify an existing home, get a single family, and get an attached, and maybe the market for this neighborhood or this time in our interest rates or whatever, it dictates that 3 more similarly sized homes are what's going to sell the fastest and what's going to be the easiest and most cost effective for me to build. So you can see from a configuration standpoint that the planning, the toolkit of how you bring an analysis to a particular property is going to open up so many doors. And right now what's great is we have 5 years of history with Seattle and Kirkland to look at these things. But this is something, as I mentioned, all the cities in Washington are opening up if they have a population size of 25,000 or a neighboring city to one that is. They have to implement similar codes to this. So what you learn in Seattle, what you learn in Kirkland, will be portable. It's stuff that you can apply to other cities and other
Can I add something, Terrance?
Yeah.
This is really important, guys. to make this even a perfect property, get an alley. And all the car can load up from here. If there's no alley, it's hard to actually load in a car,
Good point.
right? Okay, if this is a corner lot,
Yeah.
you can do that and you can load the car off to the side this way. See, that's what makes it even better.
Yeah.
What's even good also is that if this is the Dadu and all this FAR is over here, and if all the FAR could be 1,500 in the future, this could be 1,500, this could be 1,500,
Yeah.
a duplex.
Yeah.
Now you can get more rent. 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,500, 1,500. Now, see, when everybody on social media always say Burr is dead, I'll tell them, keep speaking Burr is dead. This is the new Burr. This is value add to the highest degree. You buy a property, 1,000 square foot house, for very little. You got the free land in the back. Then you maximize, put 2 duplexes on it, 1,500, 1,500, 3 bedroom. Then you rent 3 bedroom in Seattle, $3,500 each. This is the new Burr. It only works in Seattle right now. It doesn't work in Kirkland. You know why? That 1,000 square foot home costs $1.2 million for that piece of property. This right here in Seattle, $600. Get 2 free lots, build 1,500, 1,500, rent it out, cleaning house all day. This is the game plan.
Yeah.
Okay?
Rental money coming in and hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity instantly. So next picture, I'll just show you the way the color code works on this to show you how units can be done. We talk about airspace condos. These are condos where the unit of the condo is the land on the ground. It's not the unit that's going to be built on there in terms of a dwelling unit. The word unit is used in these different loose ways. It's important to understand the distinctions of these different words, right? We're talking about condo units, airspace, that's like land, that's like subdivision, that's like lot, parcel, whatever you want to say, that's the condo. Within that, if it's vacant, if it's got a structure on it, there might be a dwelling unit that you eventually build or that's on there. Whether that's called a DADU, whether that's called an AADU as an attached, whether that's called single family, duplex, triplex, whatever the dwelling unit on it is, that's going to have its own analysis as to how big it is, what's the square footage. It has nothing to do with, as you can see in blue there, that's the unit. And you can see in between the blue, we'll go through the next slide and show how the duplex was carved up here, and then one more slide. And then the other single-family part of the duplex. These are your 3 units. These are what people would buy if they were to sell, or refinance if they're going to change their loan configuration. Maybe they buy it under an original loan and then refinance to have the loan just on this piece here after they rehabbed it or whatever, and then they have a new construction loan going on here. These are what you're buying. These are those separate tax parcels. These are the subdividing without subdividing parts. These are the units. And you can see there's some land area in between the blue here that belongs to this unit 1 up here. We'll go to the next slide and show you that yellow area is an example of a common element. That would be walkway. That would be a place to store my trash on the day that it's picked up by the garbage delivery. Or maybe that's just where we stage it all week, and this is on an alleyway like that. You have some different site designs. These are not things the city's going to have. A lot of this stuff is not stuff the city's not going to think about. They're not thinking about where these lot lines are going. They're not thinking about setbacks. They're not thinking about the width of the walkway. They're not thinking about any of that because they're looking at the site as one development site. How many dwelling units will I let you get permitted here? When I'm done giving you permits to build, you're on your own. So you got to think about, okay, well, but I'm not going to just stop at building. I'm going to create separateness. I'm going to subdivide. I'm going to get parcel numbers. I'm going to have all these different options for how I can configure, buy, sell. I need to think about how this is going to lay out. So we'll go to the next slide, and 2 more, and then we'll look at how 1 more, and then you see those are the limited common elements where we did some parking areas. Not required by code. This is single family property in Seattle. Only 1 stall would have been required for what was originally the DADU. Got converted. Now we have single family here, so 1 stall would have been required by permit, but 2 more in there. Because we have an alley access, and marketing wise, it makes sense to have a couple more limited common elements to have flexibility there. Yeah, see a hand back there.
So for that, if you have that parking stall right there, so that will limit the potential of the unit to a unit we have in the garage, because that will, if this is the interior lot, right? So that will be directly in front of the garage.
Can you repeat the question, Terrance?
Yeah, so the question was asked about if you design something like this where you put parking here off an alley and you've got 2 units here that might interfere with the ability to maneuver into their garage if they had a garage. And so that's true when you look at site design, and that's why one of the burgeoning areas of this sector is architectural site design, right? Unfortunately, everybody in this trade that's been doing things a different way in the past is kind of behind. Everybody's trying to figure out, okay, I see that everything's going this new direction, all the cities are doing all these changes. How do I look at all these moving parts, and how do I design things that are going to work for home ownership, knowing that they're not only going to be going and getting permits, but then they're going to be using this private sector method of separating ownership. And so how are these sites going to function? You got to think about things like that. Now, if you did build these units with garages, you probably wouldn't need these limited common elements here. Because you would have a garage coming in here, a garage coming in here, and maybe you would create one stall for the old single family that was converted into a dadu so that it can park and maybe you put it over here, make it convenient to get to it, and the other two can come in the way they do. Site design is really important. One of the things we do with all of our clients on the very front end when they come and talk to us about a particular project they're working on is because of the last 30 years for myself and one of our other primary attorneys, Chris Nelson, who worked at Barg Housing Consulting Engineers. When I was in the survey business, she was at Barg Housing. And we both were doing this as attorneys who were doing project management. And we got to learn about all the different jurisdictions. And she worked on a lot of large plats for companies like Mainview and Lennar and all these big builders. I was working with infill people in the city generally. And so we put our collective thoughts together and made this robust checklist that's evolved over the last several years. We sent it to all of our clients and say, go down this list and think about things like the garage, the parking, the garbage. Do you want EV stations for electric? You don't have to, but do you want them? If you do you want them in the garage? Do you want them outside the garage? Like, thinking through any number of these. It's a 4 or 5 page long document, and we continue to evolve it when we see something new or creative that a client is thinking about or an architect is thinking about. We put it into our template, send it to all of our new prospective clients, and say, just go through this and think about, detach from the building permit for a second and think about when I divide this all up and I have different people living here, how do I want them to live? Do these things apply to me? Should I put them somehow into the documents? If you do, we want the surveyor and the legal work to have documentation that reflects good site design, thinks about those kinds of things. We'll move to the next slide. So,
one more question before
yes.
you go there. Someone told me to not have any common element or limited common element and only have easement, so that later
yes.
when we get insurance is we don't even
yes. Let me pause and speak about this. Important. Very important. Very important. I'll repeat the question. So the question was, someone had said something about maybe we shouldn't create any common elements or limited common elements, but just divide these by units and put easements on there for things that we want. That is a good idea, and I think even in my own paradigm shifting, I have to get away from the thought that condos, when you have shared spaces, it's got to be a common element on the map. Well, as it turns out, one of the parts of this industry that's behind is insurance. Insurance is a very difficult a part of this industry because they're trying to grapple with this new product. They're being told, we have condos that have been done privately, that have divided the land and whatever's on them, but whatever's on them is whatever it is. It might be a duplex, it might be a dadu, it might be a single family, it might be a triplex. And insurance is having difficulty figuring out what is this new product, because on the one hand it's a condo, but on the other hand it's whatever else it is. And how do we ensure that at a reasonable price for their risk management and at a premium that's fine? One of the things about condoing is that the code under that WCIWA 6490 says you have to have insurance for a variety of things depending on the way the site's been designed. One is that you always have to have a bare minimum amount of coverage for fidelity, which is if the money gets stolen out of a bank account, that's the HOA funds, it has to be able to be replenished. So that's about $100 a year. It's very cheap. So you have to have that. But if you don't have any common elements and you don't have any attached walls between any units, that's all you need. So the HOA in a sort of simple dadu in the backyard, single family in the front yard kind of paradigm you see a lot about there, with just easements if you need anything to share, that can mean that you don't have much. In any event, the point is that that's Seattle's model. Kirkland, you can get your own meter, you don't need to have shared things. I bring all that up to say, we don't know what all the other jurisdictions are doing. The city of Kent has like 7 water and sewer districts in certain. They got Sue's Creek and Cascade, and, they got Covington, like all these places serving Kent. So I don't know if they're going to be shared or not in these different jurisdictions. We're going to have to find out not only what the jurisdiction's going to permit, but what the water and sewer agencies that are serving that. You're in Burien, you have Southwest Suburban, right? You've got all these different places. You need to know the players and how they're going to be setting up, and know when they change, because this is all going to be stuff that people are going to take a first stab at it, and then they're going to evolve, right? They're going to change, because this is becoming the prolific thing. Things are going to get fine-tuned as time goes by. Okay, move forward. So yes, there's an HOA. Like I said earlier, it's so funny, I give these presentations, talk about how there's these hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting out there, gold in your backyard on thousands and thousands of lots, and somebody will walk away and go, I don't want to deal with these, that's an HOA. I don't want HOAs. I've got experiences with HOAs. Our goal in these projects is to make the HOA as limited in its involvement as possible. We know that nobody wants to buy a piece of property and sign up for a part-time job. It's not why they're buying one of these properties. They're buying this property, and the market is saying they're not distinguishing this from a normal subdivision that went through a municipal review. They buy what they see. If it's a square footage and a design in a neighborhood that they like, they buy it. And whether or not the underlying paperwork says this is a condo unit, this is a unit lot subdivision, this is a parcel from a short plat, they don't care. But at the end of the day, they do care about a whole bunch of extra workload that you're putting on them. So we try to be very careful to say, look, there's only 2 or 3 things that you do in this HOA. You have a once a year $10 fee that you pay the Secretary of State. And if you forget to do it, it comes back around, they notify you again. And if it eventually after year after year after year you don't renew it, it might go into a dissolution, and then you get several more years after that until you can reinstate it. And it's $60 when you reinstate. This is not a heavy lift if it doesn't go right. Like people say, this is not, how sustainable is this? You're trusting 25-year-olds to update a $10 thing. So what? It's going to be fine. And again, at resale, anybody goes to sell these in 5 years, 10 years, you're going to have that stuff in order. So you're going to have these checkpoints along the way where you're going to bring things into compliance, right? So it's not a big deal. But our goal is, I'm amazed, there's no other law firm out there that's doing meaningful volume in this space. And I've been waiting to see, are there going to be other firms that come along the way that see that this is the most prolific housing product, what legal work. Nobody seems to want to do this, and maybe it's because of our unique background, having done surveying and engineering and permitting and planning and thinking about these like subdivisions, that nobody else feels equipped to handle this. But I'm surprised at how little effort there's out there. But what I do see other firms doing some one-off ones here or there. Our firm does 1 or 2 a day. We see another firm does 1 or 2 a month, and we'll look at their stuff, and they have a one-size-fits-all, off-the-shelf. This is going to be how we're going to do it if it's a 100-story, skyscraper type vertical condo, or if it's a dadu with 1 unit in the backyard. They have the same thing set up. HOA's got architectural control committees and all kind of fees and something. It's like, and a huge budget. And I'm like, listen, there only needs to be a $10 annual renewal and whatever the insurance payment is. That's really your budget. If you want to throw in there a 4th of July party, and we're going to have a barbecue, and we're going to have snow plow removal and window washing and this and that, you can do whatever you want, but nobody generally wants to do that on a 2 or 3 unit infill project like this. They have a subdivision type condo. They're going to mow their own yard, they're going to wash their own windows, they're going to scrape their own sidewalk, and you just treat it like a subdivision. Everybody's on their own, unless it's truly a shared issue, and then you can deal with it as a one-time thing, or if it's a recurring thing, put it in the budget at that point. But the point is that we try to minimize this so that the dues are low, the workload is low, there's not a lot involved. We'll move to the next one. I'm going to just flip past the screen here just to say that these were, the slideshow I'll make available, so anybody who wants a copy can go through this and read through all these things, but these are 3 different budgets based on the different site elements. The one on the left was the $100 a year one, no shared areas. The one in the middle had some walkways. It had an insurance component that has to protect the common spaces, and the one on the right has common spaces plus attached walls. And when you have attached walls, the homeowner's insurance that you would normally get on your own, the HOA covers that. The HOA covers the building coverage. So that's not an extra cost. It just means the HOA budget and the dues are going to have it in there when you have shared walls by code requirement. So the budgets will change a little bit based on the site elements and design. So that'll all be in the slide deck, and I'll just provide that to you later. We'll go to the next one. So I mentioned earlier, public offering statement. If you're going to buy and hold, you don't need this. So if your goal is to buy, renovate, keep, and hold, the public offering statement is for buyers. You get the bucks. Yeah, I see.
I want to add to that when you're done.
Okay, no worries. So public offering statement is just a fancy name for a disclosure package. It's going to have things like a copy of the survey map, a copy of the declaration, and a copy of the bylaws, the articles of incorporation, budget, these different things. It's a consumer protection piece to condos that still is baked into the name condo, and even under the new Ohio code, there's some special things that condos do that normal subdivisions don't, and this is one of them, a public offering statement that tells the buyer of one of these units. Not only here's all the stuff that you need to know about how this condo was set up and what the budget is set up, but when you go under contract, whatever your other contingencies are for financing or inspection or whatever you have, they get 7 days as a buyer to review the public offering statement, all the governing documents for this condo, and they can walk for any reason. So it's an important thing for people to know. You might think, I'm under contract, 3 days later, they're mutual, they're all the contingencies are removed, whatever. No, you always have 7 days from the time. So you want to give them the public offering statement when you sign the contract. so that you can get their initials on it, and that way, or when you're mutual. So when you go mutual, here's the public offering statement, sign that you received it, you have 7 days. After that, public offering statement's out of the way. But it's an important thing to have that in your head, that you understand there's this other piece for disclosure purposes that you need to provide buyers so they know what they're getting into. Next
Very
thing.
quick question. Is
Yeah.
it 7 business day or calendar day?
I believe it's 7 calendar. 7 calendar. Next slide. Here's a big one, and then I'll wrap up for questions. So implied warranty. The old condo regime and mentality of the skyscraper kind of condos, there was a lot of ambulance chasing going on in the 2000s, leading up to the recession and even afterwards. And a lot of people who were in the multifamily condo world got out because there were attorneys, there were property managers, insurance companies, a lot of people in the industry in cahoots to say, we're going to go back to these projects 4 years after they've been sold, and we're going to do a full assessment of things, and if we see any bad roofs, any bad windows, any bad foundations, we're going to have multi-million-dollar class action type lawsuits against the developers, and it really got people freaked out. The new code, as I mentioned, went into effect in, Wakaiwa went into effect in 2018. And when that happened, some bright lines were drawn. It's 4 years from the time of your deed. So when you convey a condo unit, the buyer gets 4 years of a limited warranty of quality. It's for the major components. So things like roof, electrical, foundation, major things like that. It's not nail pops and grout and things like that. It's not warranty punch list things that you would do after 1 year. It's major systems. But the biggest law firms in Seattle that handle construction defect work in that prior paradigm, I work with one on a regular basis, Barker Martin, on bigger projects. I continually ask them, after 5 years of doing this now with Seattle and Kirkland, have you gotten your first one yet? No. We don't have any implied warranty people calling for one bad window. For one bad, because these are big cases, they take on contingencies, and it's a couple $1,000 repair. Then just be aware as a seller, you do need to keep your LLC open, you do need to be prepared to field calls for 4 years after you sell. If something major goes wrong with the condo unit. I won't go off the sidetrack on this, but if you have an old home that's part of that DADU, reconverted, all that stuff, you can carve out certain things that the buyer and the seller can agree to will not be part of that 4-year period. So if you have something concerning on an older home and you want to carve something out, you have some exclusionary language you can add there. But on new construction, generally, you're going to have a 4-year period there that you just need to be aware of. Let's move to the next slide there. Property taxes, this is just like subdivisions. When you submit a condo, just like when you submit a subdivision for recording, it takes the assessor some time, right, to get their assessor numbers assigned to these and the values assigned and everything else. So if you do the condo right away, you're going to sell, I'm not going to have new parcel numbers just yet. You're going to have legal descriptions, you're going to have title, you're going to have a recorded condo, and you don't actually need a tax parcel number at that point yet if it's not yet available, because you can use the old one and just say it's a portion of it. You will get a new tax parcel. It'll come in the next 6 months. We've got language that we can, you'll see in the slide deck here, that you can put in purchase agreements that help if they get a tax bill and they haven't gotten their new number yet. It's just the old one and they need to prorate it. We've got language here that will help you in purchase and sale agreements that kind of help the new owners know how they might carve it up. Next slide. Just a couple examples here and then we'll open up for questions. The one on the left, this is your put a line down the middle. Got a DADU and a single family, no easements, or no common elements I should say, so nothing separate from the units, just 2 units, nothing else. And then the middle one here, we've got your more, like the first example I showed you where there's a structure with a duplex kind of thing with 3 units and then some walkways. Here, like in the single family zones, and some of the jurisdictions are going to this FAR where they're saying we're going to give you a certain number of FAR and you don't have to connect any of the units as attached. You can have them all be detached. Kirkland right now allows you to have all 3 of your units detached. So in an SFR or an RSL zone in Seattle or Kirkland, you might be able to have density that allows you to build 3, 4, 5, 6 units. You can also buy 2 lots next door to one another, get 2 different sets of permits and do 1 condo on all of them and end up with 6 at the end, right? Instead of 3. So there's different configurations here for you to work out. And this just shows you how you might have 6 different units all detached with walkway, parking, trash areas and all that. Just different design ideas to get the creative juices flowing there. So, and I think that's it. We'll go to the next one there. Oh, I just like showing this picture. This is a North Seattle project. I always tell my client on this, More Homes was this client. They had a 34-foot wide lot by 100 deep. That's 3,400 square feet. 50% of that is 1,700 square feet they can have in the single family. And the other 2 could be 1,000. The single family is 3 stories with a rooftop deck looking into the city. The attached dwelling unit in the back is 3 stories with the rooftop deck. How they get 3 stories? Because the first floor is a garage and flex space, not counted in 1,000 square feet. They got the second and third floor for their 1,000. The back is the detached DADU with just 2 stories, 3 units. This selling for 1.3, this selling for 1, this selling for 800, almost $3 million worth of sales. They paid $500,000 for the property and tore down the old house.
Woo! Where you guys at, huh?
So that's a 3,400 square foot lot, 34 by 100. People always ask me, what can I do in my lot? I have 5,000 square feet. A lot! You do a lot. And under the new code with 1,500 square feet and 3 bedrooms and with 50% of your lot coverage instead of 35%, a lot is what you can do if you're creative. Now, not every site's flat, not every site's rectangular, not every site can work. I understand there's a lot of parameters and stuff, but I like to give that example because it shows you that if you use a good architect, if you site design well and think this through, you can do an amazing product. And there are thousands and thousands of these lots out there. That's why I call it a gold rush. That's why I say this reminds me of the stories you hear about people who came to Seattle in the late 1800s looking for the gold. They were getting outfitted and going up to Alaska on the Yukon Gold Rush, and they were getting all their equipment, their pickaxes and their sifters and their shovels and all that. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to beer and getting a belt buckle, and I'm going to be the person that promotes all of the tools that people need to be able to unlock the gold in their backyard. It's the same principle. Try to find a way to stake your claim, right? There's all of these different opportunities out there, and this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. This is something in 30 years that I've been in the industry and talking to people who were the old-timers who were here when I started in the 90s, who had been involved in the 70s and 80s and all that. Nobody's seen anything like this because we're changing the way people live. The real estate market, think about the way platting has developed over the years with the house in the middle and the big yards and this. This is a different time. Finding a way to create 1 million to 2 million people are coming into this region in the next 10 to 15 years. They're going to have to go somewhere. They're going to go in the backyards and the side yards, and you guys are going to find the gold.